Ever wondered about contemporary wine trends in Israel? That's something we're going to discuss in this episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. We're currently in Tel Aviv with returning guest, Adam Montefiore. Adam, welcome.
Hi, Rabbi Drew. Welcome to the Holy Land. Eretz HaKodesh.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we're here surrounded by wine, and not just any place with a bunch of wine.
Well, this is the cellar of Derech Hiyin, which is the first international style wine store in Israel. It was founded by the Sheked family in 1993. Then they were representing the Golan Heights Winery, and the Golan Heights Winery and Wine, the Yarden brand, and the Sheked family in retailing and distribution created a wine revolution in Israel. So it's historically a nice place to be 30 years later, to sit and drink wine and talk in the original Derech Hiyin, which means wine route. This one's Hashmonaim Street in Tel Aviv.
First of all, great surroundings. We're all four sides surrounded by wine, but also the temperature. Nicely cooled. Yeah,
it's certainly cooler in here than outside, yes, where it's pretty hot and humid. And it's a pleasure to spend a few hours with you in here.
Absolutely. And a pleasure to spend it with you.
And drink wine too.
Even better.
L'chaim.
For those perhaps less familiar with you, Adam, or maybe you haven't heard the previous episodes, which, by the way, if you have not yet heard those, it's a two-parter on contemporary or modern Israeli wine history. Absolutely, definitely check those out. You, biographically, in addition to, on top of being the Jerusalem Post wine writer, columnist, what other biographical details would you like to share with us?
I started in the beer trade in England, starting with a company called Bass Charrington, which is a very big brewery in England. They had interest in hotels and big wine interests, and that was my gateway into wine. I worked in wine in England. I made Aliyah in 1989. And since then worked for the Golan Heights Winery for 11 years, and then the Carmel and Yatir Winery for 16 years. I've been a small part or an active part of the sort of wine revolution that's happened in Israel, certainly an observer of the wine revolution that's happened in Israel over the last 30 years.
30 is a big number here. Obviously, we're here, the basement of Derech Hiyin in Tel Aviv, opened 30 years ago, 1993. You just mentioned wine revolution. So being part of the story, what can you share with us about the wine? I never heard of this phrase, wine revolution in Israel. So how would you broadly describe it? Of course, we can double click into it, but how would you describe what's been taking place?
When I came to Israel, there were 12 wineries. One of them had, in 1989, I came to Israel. There were 12 wineries, and one of the wineries, called Carmel Mizrahi, had 75% of the business. Wow. So there was basically one big winery in Israel, 11 small ones, and this was the wine industry in Israel.
I have to pause you there because one of the biggest insights I took away, and I've shared with many people from the previous recording, is Carmel is a combination. It's like an abbreviation of Kerem Ale, which blew me away, and I continue to share with people.
Oh, cool. Nice.
This merging of a vineyard of God. So God's vineyard is Carmel. It's not like the caramel candy we eat.
It's a fantastic name for that reason. And also, of course, you see wine named Carmel that used to be exported in ancient times. Wine was named after where it came from in those days. It wasn't named after the grape variety, or it was sometimes named after the style, but it wasn't named after the grape variety. And there was wine, there was Gazan wine and Ashkelon wine and Carmel wine. So Carmel is a name that is from our history. And they also founded the modern Israeli wine industry in the 1880s, founded by Baron Edmund Rothschild, who was a co-owner of Chateau Lafite, with French experts. And the wine revolution really started in the 1980s with the Golan Heights Winery, with Californian expertise.
But anybody who would like to find out 1890s information can definitely check out, or 1880s, or whatever, can check out those two previous episodes.
Yeah, we don't want to return over old, but
it's a good reminder for people to get the historical context.
That's right. Yeah. And where we've come to from 89 to now is nothing short of a miracle. I mean, I wouldn't have believed that we could be where we are today with 350 plus wineries, winning awards or recognition all over the world. 350 wineries. And that's not including all the domestic wineries and the personal people that are making wine in their garage at home and this sort of thing. And also the quality of wine and the variety of wine. So we have, I call it the Israeli wine revolution. Young Israelis went abroad to study winemaking. They all came back with different experiences, different stages in different countries under their belts to come into a melting pot of wine in Israel and to contribute to winemaking here. And the results in terms of the improvement in quality of Israeli wine has been simply amazing. It's difficult to believe. And it happened very fast. It's happened in 30 years. In some countries, it's taken a century. But Israelis are very hungry. And when they want to do something, thirsty, and when they want to do something, they learn very quickly and very inventive. And of course, this is a country of wine grapes and wine from the beginnings of before the Jewish people. In the time of Canaan, the Canaanites were the best winemakers in the world of their time. So this knowledge of winemaking they bequeathed to the Israelites, and look where we are today.
We can do broad strokes. We can double click into it. But broad strokes, what have you seen in addition to this explosion of wineries?
Well, the first thing is a desire to make quality wine. That was the first change. In the 80s, I suppose people made wine and food in those days for distribution. There was no branding. There was no quality food product. Wine was made in those days so people could make Kiddush in different countries around the world. It wasn't seen as a quality industry. The first step was a desire to make quality wine and an appreciation to make quality wine in a hot country. You need high altitude vineyards and you need modern technology.
Well, I know you shared with us in a previous episode about the late 70s and into the 80s with the Golan Heights having the high altitude aspects. I'm curious now, hearing what you just shared, it sounds more about a functionality and not just wine in an isolation, sort of in a vacuum, but also within the broader consumptive aspect, right?
Yes, in the 1990s, we had what we call the small winery revolution, when small wineries started popping up all over Israel. Growers that used to give their grapes kept some back to make their own wine. Domestic winemakers suddenly started putting a label on and selling their wine. The 90s was a special time because there was a touch of peace in the air. Israelis started, there was a good economy. Oslo Accords. Israelis started traveling more and suddenly saw the food and wine and gastronomy in different countries around the world and came back demanding it in Israel. And there was a revolution that happened also in olive oil, in bread production, and also in cheeses at the same time as the wine revolution. And it all happened in the late 80s, early 90s. And wine was just part of that movement to becoming feinschmeckers, basically. People traveled abroad. People visited wineries. People would book in top restaurants and travel back home. And for the first time, people start to appreciate quality wine. And they wanted to buy quality wine. And to make quality wine, you have to want to make quality wine because it begins in the vineyards. It begins with how you care for the vineyard, the viticulture, long before you produce the wine. It's a long process. So the desire to make quality wine was also part of the right economy to make it, and also people's desire to choose the better quality wine, even though at a higher price than the cheaper wine. And gradually, but as I explained, it wasn't so gradual. There was a total change, and suddenly wine became a subject that people talked about. Wines won prizes. That nothing creates interest like a wine winning a prize abroad, and
especially for Israelis.
They
don't trust it unless there's an external award, right?
Listen, Israelis are very aspirational, and everyone wants everything at the same time. So when the first sushi restaurant opened in Israel, Suddenly there were hundreds of sushi restaurants, sometimes one alongside the other, all opening within months.
Okay.
When frozen yogurt came to Israel, suddenly there were so this happened with wine. Wine became one of the subjects which was aspirational. People who were educated, who understood, drank wine, and this is one of the reasons. In the early days, there were many wine experts who used to say, "Oh, I only drink red wine," as if that said something that that they understand more because they only drank red wine, which is one of the most stupid things I've ever heard. But that was often said in those times.
I am a red wine lover, but I am expanding my, having.
Well, when I first came to Israel, they drank more white than red.
Really?
Yes, and now white wine is coming back because it's better for our cuisine.
Uh-huh.
You have far more variety of white wine than red wine.
Huh.
It's more suitable for our climate. It's lighter. You can drink more.
Why was there more white wine being consumed than red?
Because red wine in those days was more astringent. It was more difficult you had to keep it and age it so it would soften. And we had a very popular wine called Emerald Riesling,
Okay.
which wasn't the great German Riesling. It was a cross between Muscadel and the German Riesling, but it was cross made in California, which took off only in Israel, and it became a semi-dry wine as popular as Lambrusco in America or Liebfraumilch in England. And a lot of Israelis came to wine on this semi-dry wine. It was only later, after really 1992. You know what happened in 1992?
Curious.
The French paradox, when people said that they realized that the French are drinking a lot of red wine, and yet they're eating all the fatty foods and the yellow cheeses, and yet their cholesterol was lower than than people that weren't doing it. So people realized that red wine was good for health, and at that stage, there was a turnaround from red to white, as new people that thought they understood wine would say, we only drink red wine because it's because we understand, so we drink red wine. And also wineries started to learn how to make red wines like white wines, fruity, Mount Herman red as an example, fruity, not astringent, good acidity, refreshing. So suddenly red wine, there was a change in how we made red wines, and also a change in image.
Yeah.
And it was all because of the 60 Minutes program on the French Paradox in 1992 in America that changed the whole industry, and we became a red wine drinking country until now. Really, we drink
like overnight.
It was overnight. I mean, in the Golden Heights winery, I remember we had to graft. We had Sauvignon Blanc grapes. We had to graft with Cabernet Sauvignon because of the new demand of So you miss a year, you graft, and then you carry on. So there was a change. But now, thankfully, white wines are coming back, and so they should.
Hey there, hope you're enjoying this episode featuring Adam Montefiore as we discuss contemporary wine trends, as he is the wine writer for Jerusalem Post. Well, guess what? Next week we're featuring Jerusalem Post beer writer to talk about contemporary beer trends. Here's a sneak peek.
I look upon this as all really blessed activity that people are doing this.
And a lot of
looking for Israeli, how to make a beer Israeli.
And a lot of this has really been the last 5-10 years?
Yes.
Wow. Hope you enjoy that sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Doug Greener. And here we go back into this episode with Adam Montefiore. I'm kind of curious. I am admittedly a red wine drinker, and I will shortly transition from the white to the red, just as you have mentioned happened in the 90s here in Israel. One thing I have discovered, and maybe this is a more recent thing, I know what I usually drink in America as far as kosher wines. It's usually Cabernet Sauvignons, the Merlots, the darker reds. I try to switch it up. Israel, like a third of them, the leading varietal is Carignan. How did that come to? I never heard of Carignan. It's not that common in America. How did that come to be that Carignan is a leading varietal in Israeli wines?
Well, that's a story that goes right back to the beginning, because Carignan has been here longer than Rothschild was. Before Rothschild came, Carignan was here.
And I know it's a Mediterranean variety.
It's a Mediterranean variety from Spain and the south of France. It was brought to Israel by Mikveh Yisrael, the agricultural school, in the 1870s. And when Rothschild came here, he wanted to plant Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Malbec. His experts said, no, they won't grow here. He insisted he wanted to make a Grand Van, Israeli wine. But the grapes didn't work because the yields were too low of these fancy grape varieties. The farmers complained. And no one wanted a really quality wine. They wanted Kiddush wine, or they wanted altar and communion wine for the Christian market. And as a result they grubbed, and then they all got phylloxera, the louse that destroyed the vineyards throughout Europe, came to Israel.
France, yeah.
And when they grubbed up the vineyards, they planted Carignan instead, and Alicante. So Carignan became the variety of Israel. Why? Because it was high yielding, and it could be used for everything. It could be used for making sweet Kiddush wines. It could be used for making table wines. It could be used for making grape juice, and the yields were very high.
Did phylloxera not hit Israel, or it just hit?
It hit Israel. It hit Israel. So they had to replant. In fact, it's a good story.
American stuff, right?
Yeah, with American
So that's
rootstock.
what France had to do.
But there's a nice story that Rothschild was the owner of Chateau Lafite, most famous chateau in the world. And they had a nursery in Kashmir, in India, which didn't have phylloxera, which they used to supply his wine interests.
Okay.
It's on the right latitude, and they bought the vineyard cuttings from Kashmir to Israel, and they were known for years as the Indian vines. Yeah. So that's just a story by the by, but a nice story.
I lost my mind for a moment. I switched from white to red.
Yeah. Well, this is
sorry, not sorry.
No, this
incredible.
This is. Well,
aside from being incredible, what?
Okay, so the white wine we tasted is the Recanati Chardonnay from the Tel Aviv vineyard in the Golan Heights.
Oh, Golan Heights.
Recanati winery is now in the Upper Galilee. They have a brand new winery there, and this is one of our top 10 largest wineries, but always has an impressionist still of a boutique image, even though it's still quite a large winery.
Large production.
They produce great wines, and this wine is, I think it's very creamy. It's very good fruit. It's a combination of the old style peaches and cream style Chardonnay, which is quite rich and buttery, and the new style, which is more steely and got acidity that runs all the way through it. It's a good combination of the two. It's refreshing, and it's a really nice Chardonnay. Wow. The second one is Yarden. Syrah is one of the new varieties in Israel. When I say new, in the last 25 years, a Mediterranean variety known as Shiraz in Australia, Syrah in the south of France, and the Rhone. And this is a super wine. It's just won a big medal, a platinum medal in the Texcom in Texas, Texsom competition in Texas. And this has got so much depth and so much fruit, and such a chewy mouthfeel, and something like smoked meat flavors in the mouth. And yet still has quite a very full mouthfeel, but leathery but quite a refreshing finish and a very long length. So
this is night and day against the white.
Yarden was the first winery which was planted at high altitude. It was first planted in 1976. The winery was founded in 1983. It was the first winery to use high-altitude vineyards. And as a result, the whole of the wine industry in the last 30 years has moved its volume from the coastal regions, which are hot and humid, to the higher mountain regions of the Upper Galilee and the Golan Heights and the Jerusalem Mountains.
When are you talking about? What time? I know we started talking about 19th century, but are we talking about the late 20th?
We're talking about the late 20th century and the early 2000s, really the 90s and the 2000s.
It's really been the last several decades, this topographical transition, and also more inland.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. So it all started with Yarden. You've just been at the Milk and Honey distillery.
Sure.
I wish I could have joined you there. I would have come like a shot. But the success they're having now, reminds me very much of Yarden in the late 80s and early 90s, winning awards and people saying, "What, Israel?" And now, of course, it's commonplace. It's not just Yarden; it's many Israeli wineries, and it's all over the world. So wine we're really in a different place today.
One thing you mentioned recently was about Kiddush wines and sweet wines, and it's not such a thing in America as far as a separate distinction between Kiddush wines. If something is kosher, it's a kosher wine. Fine, it's sort of a very flattened sort of surface. But in Israel, I know this past Shabbat I spent at a hotel and they had a special wine they brought out to the tables, Yayin LeKiddush, Kiddush wine. And I know we've spoken before about Kiddush wines. It's not something on the the American scene. I don't know about more generally in the diaspora, but in Israel, this whole separate thing about Kiddush wines. It reminds me, at least, I can't speak about all Kiddush wines here in Israel, but it reminded me very much of a Manischewitz, of a Kedem Concord grape. How much of a thing, or now we're speaking chronologically of 1980s, 1990s versus previously, what was the kosher wine scene like here in Israel?
The K word has caused us a lot of trouble, whether it's kosher or Kiddush.
But I will also say opportunity as well.
Sure.
There are markets for those.
Oh, sure. I'm talking about in terms of image in the image perception in the non-Jewish world.
Yeah.
So people began to think that Jewish ethnic wine was sweet, it was cooked, it was probably undrinkable, and it's like altar or communion wine. You have it on Friday night, and it's not real wine. It's something that you only have on this occasion. We use the word Kiddush wine, which is really, to the non-Jewish world, they would call it sacramental wine, which is to differentiate between Kiddush and kosher. So Kiddush is a group of kosher wines which were used for religious ritual, maybe. And kosher can be fine wines of the standard of Castel, or Yatir, or Recanati, or Yarden, which can win awards all over the world for their quality. We don't want people who taste these wines to be thinking kosher Kiddush. We want them to think of quality Israeli Mediterranean wines instead of Jewish ethnic wines. So we use the word Kiddush wine to describe the sacramental wines that are used for religious ritual, which provide us with an image problem, because we don't want people thinking that kosher wine is automatically sweet and undrinkable.
Right, confining and pigeonholing.
Yeah.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Wanted to let you know this is not the only episode focusing on Israel. Earlier this summer, I went to Israel. That's right, and even better, I also drank in Israel and found out what's going on. So I sat down with people to talk about beer, wine, and whiskey. What's going on in Israel these days? It's all part of a Toast to Israel at 75 series we've got going on. These 6 episodes are all available. You can find them at different places, but you can also check them out, jewishdrinking.com/Israel Toast 75. I hope you check them out. L'chaim, now back into the episode. You shared about the 1990s, now moving on to this century. Now we're already in the first quarter of this century, so 2000. So was there something noticeably different in the first decade or even second decade of this century versus the 1990s?
Yeah, in the 1990s, people mainly made varietal wines, aping America. So wines were termed, what's a varietal? It's a wine which is named after the dominant grape variety, which could be Cabernet Sauvignon, or it could be Chardonnay. And people came attuned to wines named after grape varieties. Blends were few and far between. And the grape varieties tended to be Bordeaux grape varieties. So Sauvignon Blanc white, Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot reds.
What would you attribute that to? I mean, is it just like Israelis, or I mean, I know the Jewish palate typically tends towards that Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot. It's more full flavored.
I think it's easier. It's easier if you know the grape variety, you know the wine. Mm-hmm. If you know what Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot is, you can understand the wine far easier than if it's just got a generic name, proprietary name. Mm-hmm. So in terms of marketing, in terms of understanding quickly, to name the wine after the varietal makes it a lot easier. And during this time, Cabernet Sauvignon took over from Carignan as the most planted variety in Israel, as it is today. Cabernet Sauvignon is the most planted.
More planted?
More planted than Carignan.
Carignan is still incredibly prevalent.
The biggest planted variety is Cabernet Sauvignon, followed by Carignan and then Merlot. And then there's a gap, and there's Shiraz or Syrah, and then Petit Verdot. Those are the 5 big boys. But Cabernet Sauvignon is dominant in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. And Cabernet Sauvignon,
for the American kosher palate, Cabernet Sauvignon is still incredibly. But even you're saying in Israel,
I think it's probably the number one brand in our business. By brand, I mean people going into a supermarket, they haven't got a clue what to buy. They see Cabernet Sauvignon and they think, I've heard of that, I'll buy it.
Are you saying even beyond the kosher market?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, even beyond it.
For sure. The Cabernet Sauvignon brand is massive. Oh, it's massive.
It's not particular to the kosher market.
No. The kosher market is a niche within a large market, and they operate very similarly. Huh. What happens in the large market will later happen in kosher. There's nothing new under the sun. You don't need me to tell you that.
That's my favorite book of the time.
Wonderful. We also had Moscato Madness here, as they called it in America.
I've heard of that.
And, Bartonora was a big success in America. And you know what? I'm all for it. I mean, a lot of people drink
wine.
A lot of people, in America, you had White Zinfandel. In England, we had Liebfraumilch.
What?
Liebfraumilch, which was a sort of German semi-sweet, semi-dry wine. Today we have Blue Nun. It's a very big brand in Israel.
I had one of those. Delicious.
Yeah, people love it. And so now the wine snob looks down their nose and say, these are people that don't understand wine. But I'm sorry, these are drinkers, and they're still wine drinkers, and they have their taste. And my view is you drink what you like, and let the experts be damned. You buy what you like, and if you like Moscato, you drink it. And I believe Moscato is the perfect Jewish wine. Why? Because it's low alcohol, it's slightly bubbling, frizzanti, it's sweet but not really heavily sweet, and all these things, and it's really tasty because it's the Muscat grape. And I think it's the perfect
any day of the year.
It's the perfect Kiddush wine. It's the perfect family wine for Friday night. Yeah. The children can have a sip. A lot of people drink grape juice, or some people mix Kiddush wine and grape juice. Here you have the Moscato. I mean, the best thing is to drink a Yarden or a Recanati for Kiddush and then go on to drink it with the meal. But if you want to touch a sweetness for children or people that don't like wine, the great aunt that doesn't like wine, Moscato. People who hate wine love Moscato. So I'm for it, and I believe there's a place.
Uniter.
Listen, drink what you want, and it doesn't matter if the wine snob says you're drinking this. To hell with it. You drink what you want with confidence, and it's okay. It's okay. You want Moscato, drink Moscato.
It also drives and attracts attention to wine, even for non-wine drinkers.
Yeah, it's an open tent, and everyone, we were all at Sinai. Doesn't matter whether you were gay or whatever, or Reform or Orthodox.
Yeah, we're all united,
and we're all wine drinkers. So the 2000s came, and people started moving away from varietals, more to blended wines. People started planting more Mediterranean varieties. People started making quality wines from our heritage varieties, like Carignan and Petit Syrah. Winemakers realized if you lowered the yields, and tried to make a high quality wine from these old vine vineyards, you could make something very original, very Israeli, rather unique. And all this happened in the early 2000s. So more Mediterranean varieties came in, more people tried to make quality wines from what I call our adopted varieties or heritage varieties, like Carignan and Petit Syrah, varieties that aren't Israeli, but they became...
They work. They work within
within our climate, and so people, it's like we adopted them as our own varieties. Winemakers started making wines, trying to make wines leaner, lower alcohol, more fruit forward, less oaky, and this is a movement that occurred certainly in the 2000s.
Why? What drove that? How much of that was consumer driven? How much of it was trying to meet demand?
I think it was twofold. I think a winemaker, a new winemaker, when he first makes wines, until he gets the confidence and experiments, they tend to start making wines that are far more oaky because it's a safety thing. But gradually, as they got more confidence, they would find their own level. And you obviously want to make something that's more, an oaky wine. You can have a really heavy Australian wine. Let's say an example.
Like a Shiraz.
And you can say a Shiraz.
Yeah.
And you can smell it and it's fantastic. You taste it and you say, wow, but do you want another glass? It's so big. It's so exhausting. It doesn't grab you for another glass. So the whole idea was to make a wine that makes you want another shluck, which is the Hebrew slang for another taste. You want to quench the thirst. So firstly, the winemakers started understanding that they wanted to make wines that were more enticing, and the consumer, who now understood a bit about wine, wanted something more refreshing. The boutique wine industry happened here in the 90s, started with Castel and wineries like this, Syrah, and then at the early 2000s, the big wineries responded. All of them invested in new wineries. They started changing their names. Carmel Mizrahi changed to Carmel Winery. Efrat changed to Tepperberg. Elias changed to Binyamina. Ashkelon Wines changed to Segel Wines. As they all changed names to try and make them more sexy and more geared up to the modern wine crowd, rather than the old liquid religion that you used to produce before. Liquid religion is my term for Kiddush wine and grape juice.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
So
stay with me.
Liquid religion. So that was another change that happened. The big wineries all responded in the early 2000s.
Liquid religion is going to stay in my ears the entire time.
Yeah, it's something I picked up from someone, and it's great. It's great.
What was that story? There's got to be a story behind that.
Well, there isn't really. I just heard it from someone else and adopted it and used it, because in Israel, a lot of the production, we produce something like 12 million bottles of grape juice a year. And as far as
specifically
grape juice, and I'm not talking about grape juice in Tetra Pak, I'm talking about grape juice from wine varieties that the wineries make, and it's for use in religious ritual.
As grape juice.
As grape juice. And here, grape juice is considered part of the wine industry in a way. I mean, it's not wine, it's grape juice, but it's produced by the wineries. And we don't have this great division that you have in America, where grape juice is food and wine is wine. It became very popular because people considered grape juice more healthy than sweet sacramental wine. So in Israel, for Kiddush, many more traditional Israeli Jews used to use grape juice than, grape juice is massive in Israel. We produce something like 45 million bottles of wine and 12 million bottles of grape juice.
It's probably unheard of throughout the Western world.
That's right. And a lot of people will use this grape juice for Kiddush.
Yeah. I will say, hopefully this comes through the microphone. Okay. I will say, I enjoy, even better than the grape juice I have in America, the Tirosh here in Israel. I love it. It's much better in my mind.
I agree with you. And the Rolls Royce is certainly the Carmel Tirosh, made with no additives, made from wine grapes. and it's probably the more expensive, but it's the one that's, our standard. What's also happened is the major trend is people are starting to think regional in Israel. There will be a time in the near future when you won't talk about an Israel Cabernet Sauvignon. You'll talk about an Israeli Negev wine, or Upper Galilee wine, or Judean Hills wine, or Golan wine. Which varieties do well in these particular regions? Up to now, you have your Cabernet Sauvignon that's grown everywhere. People will soon differentiate. The Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, grows better at higher altitude. It's better in the Upper Galilee and the Golan Heights, maybe. And Merlot may be better in the Central Mountain region. These are distinctions that are becoming more apparent now as we search our identity. And people are talking more about regions and single vineyards and individual plots within regions. And this is we talk about the revolutions. This is the identity revolution, which is what's happening now.
It's also about unique or otherwise specific varietals that are specific to one region or another. I know there's also with especially Professor Shivi Drury, finding specific varietals unique or otherwise. Have you found that as well? Is that a move to finding whether with Argamon or Petoni or other unique aspects here?
These are really fascinating to the wine lover. I mean, if I go to a wine list and I see something that I've never tasted before, I have to taste it. I have to order the wine that a variety I don't know or from a country I don't know, something that might be seen as exotic. And certainly the beauty of Argamon is that it's a variety that you can only get in Israel. There's no other country in the world selling Argamon. So every country in the world is selling Cabernet Sauvignon. But with the other varieties, we're on a journey. We're doing a lot of experimentation. The Bituni and the Marawi and the Dabuki, these are all great. They're very interesting to wine geeks or wine anoraks like myself, like you. But in fact,
happy to be honorarily included on that.
Yeah, but for sure. But Jancis Robinson, the most famous wine writer of the day, the master of wine, made a quote. She said, "One shouldn't confuse interest with quality." Now, no doubt that these grape varieties, even though they're incredibly interesting, and it's fascinating what's happening, and we don't know where we might end up with new varieties that are very important to the Israeli wine industry. At the moment, no doubt we can make better wines from the noble grape varieties or the Mediterranean grape varieties, but it's a journey. You know, in Greece, they have a variety called Malagousia. They discovered about 40 years ago. They redeveloped it. Took cuttings, replanted it, and now it's become one of the standard varieties of Greece. And I believe our job is to try and find our Malagousia, which is to try and find our local variety that's been here for centuries. And that's what we're doing now. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of interest. I try and taste everything that comes out, but we shouldn't.
Tough job. Tough job.
It's a dirty job.
Someone's got to do it.
It's a dirty job. Someone's got to do it. Yeah, the joke doesn't change wherever you. Yeah, but on the other hand, I wouldn't pretend these are Israel's best wines. They might be the most interesting wines, but they're not the best. The most interesting thing about Israel is variety. Now we're a tall thing, not so tall, but we're variety of varietals, variety of microclimates. The harvest in Israel, to give you an example,
August through October.
It can be July, and it has been known to. Yeah, it starts mid-July or end of July with the Moscato and the usually the sparkling wine grapes, and it has been known on a few occasions to go to the first week of November in the northern Golan Heights. Most of it is August to October, but we have a very long harvest in Israel.
August through October, but when I hear July, November.
In France and California, it's a 2-month harvest. Here, we have this long harvest. Why? Because we have such variety, diversity of microclimates. And that makes Israel a fascinating area. You know, you can go ski diving, you can go skiing on Mount Hermon in the morning, drive half a day, drive through the desert, and go coral reef diving in the Red Sea in Eilat in half a day. And we have enormous diversity of variety of varietals, as you said, of climates, of wine styles. Our winemakers, I talked about the French Revolution when Rothschild bought French experts, the Californian Revolution when Golden Heights Winery started. Now our winemakers come from everywhere. And they all do stages in different famous wineries in different wine regions around the world. They come back here, and it's a melting pot.
Right. I know a lot of them are studying out in California, UC Davis. I imagine France, and fascinating for me to hear you about Australia and New Zealand, even.
Yeah. So we're a real melting pot of knowledge and of drive of young, hungry professionals that are desperate to try different things. And we have a lot of varietals here because everyone's trying to experiment with everything. And planting in the desert, planting on the mountains, planting in the valleys. Listen, I'll tell you a story which I can't mention the winery, but a few years ago, the owner, the winemaker, and the research and development team of one of the most famous wineries in the world, came to Israel for a week to visit wineries, to visit university professors and academics, and to learn about all the new things happening in wine and in agriculture in Israel. And I asked them, why are you coming here? Why didn't you go to Australia, California? And they said, the research and development, the technology that you have in Israel is, no one is doing this research and technology to the same extent as Israel. And they came to Israel, but it was meant to be a secret visit. So when I posted about it on LinkedIn, I was told to take it down, which of course I did. Yeah. Though it wasn't secret because they met so many people. but it's a story that explains that Israel is seen as a fascinating country because of its technology, because of the agricultural prowess of the country, which is very inventive and creative, and because of the onset of global warming. The way Israel is growing wine in the desert is fascinating to everyone. So we are seen as, we talk about general things. We can talk about drip feed irrigation, which Israel gave to the world. But there are many technological advances that are happening in the vineyards, and people from these really famous wineries are coming to Israel to learn from us what we're doing new. And that's a big compliment. So Israel has a lot to offer as a cutting edge in agriculture, in viticulture, in coping with global warming. And this can be seen as well as anywhere in the Negev desert, where who would make wine in a desert, but an Israeli.
Adam, this has been amazing, phenomenal, insightful, enlightening, so much more. Before we finish, is there anything you would like to promote?
Well, the first thing I'd like to promote is Jewish drinking. I came across Jewish drinking by chance, and since then I've become a Jewish drinking addict.
Thank you.
I mean, you cover areas that is not covered by any textbook. You have experts that where you find them all, I don't know, but you can discover the maximum trivia, which is absolutely fascinating about our wine in the Jewish history, in biblical history, or in the Talmud, or anywhere you like. And you can become an expert by looking at old versions of Jewish drinking, and I find it, simply absorbing. Wow. So thank you for bringing Jewish drinking. All the questions I have.
The price of flying over to Israel here.
All the questions I have.
I didn't even pay you to say that.
Yeah, all the well, I'm hoping you will, but all the questions that I have that I usually ask religious friends. And they can never answer. Oh. Your guests cover them. I mean, you cover such interesting subjects. So I do recommend it. What I'd like to promote is I've just launched a new book. This is Domaine de Castel, the biography by me. It's a book which tells the story of the Israeli dream coming true. It's a wonderful story of someone who, Eli Ben Zaken, he was born in Egypt. He went to school in England. He went to university in Switzerland. He came to Israel. Life was very difficult in Israel. They really struggled. In the end, he created a wine dynasty, a winery that's become one of the most famous wines in Israel. It's a wonderful story of Jewish success, of Israeli success, and it was from a kosher point of view, it was the first great winery that went kosher when it wasn't kosher previously.
Right, started as non-kosher.
It started off as non-kosher and became known as one of the top Eastern Mediterranean wineries in the world. He went kosher in 2003, fully kosher in 2003, and since then, the wines has won continual awards. So from my point of view, this winery is a very important winery for us to give the message that kosher doesn't count. It counts for the person that needs it. It's important to the person that needs it on the back label. But in terms of the quality of the wine, it's totally insignificant. And Castell taught us that. Wow. So this is a book that's just come out in the last few weeks.
Amazing. Well,
and I'm happy to give you one.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Enjoy it. Read it. It's a wonderful story.
Thank you. All right. With all of that, Adam, thank you so much. And l'chaim.
L'chaim. Enjoy the rest of your stay.